on in. I know now we're recording. That's unfortunate. All of you listening at home are not going to get to hear the incredible wisdom that we were sharing in the 30 seconds before this. But yeah, cool. We'll give it a few minutes. I know what time is it? 1 o'clock. So we get the most wonderful, the most wonderful scheduling time in the world, which is the right after lunch shift, which is great. It's okay. We'll make it engaging. Let's see. Normally, Corey, not to put you on the spot, but
Uh-oh.
normally when we have a few minutes
Hmm.
at the beginning, I always have to ask if people have a cybersecurity joke that they love, and
Oh, wow.
you'd be surprised how many people don't. It's okay, no shame if you don't.
I don't know that I do right off the top of my head. There's probably one that'll come later.
That's right. We'll make sure that we'll follow up on that so you have the chance
Yeah,
to ask some.
that'd be a good Q&A prompt too.
Yeah, what's the best cybersecurity joke that you guys have? That's what I'm talking about. But cool. All right, we're gonna get started here. Just wanted to welcome everybody to another Nucleus webinar. As we obviously always appreciate the time that you're spending with us. We try to make these as educational as possible. Very much, we know that vendor webinars are oftentimes just, sort of droll and boring. So we do our best to make sure we're bringing on experts, we're bringing on thought leaders, and we can really have a great discussion about different topics that are important to the industry. So we're stoked that you're here. We'd love it if you guys engage with us throughout this. Feel free to drop Q&A or questions, not the A. I mean, you can always answer if you want, but mostly questions. If you have any questions for us or for Corey, feel free to drop that into the chat below. And we'll try to answer those kind of either throughout or at the end. But with that, let's go ahead and get started on our monthly webinar here. So the topic of the day, right, is I feel hilarious even saying this, but we really can't get too far into a cybersecurity conversation without bringing up the topic of AI. And those that know me know that I like to like Heisman Trophy that topic from me, so that I don't have to talk about AI too much. But our team convinced me that it is time for me to go on record and start talking about AI. So we brought one of the greatest experts we know in relation to AI pen testing in particular, Corey Brunkow here. But with that, let's go ahead and just do some quick intros, just so everybody knows who we're talking to. So as always, my name is Scott Kuffer. I'm one of the co-founders of Nucleus. I'm our chief product officer. So all that sort of fun stuff around product strategy, vision, et cetera, et cetera. And with us today, we have Corey Brunkow from Horizon 3. Corey, say hi to the people.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. I'm super excited to be here. I'm actually at the National Cyber Summit down in Huntsville, Alabama today, so super fun to break away from that and talk about our product and the problems with AI and security now. A little bit about me. I retired from the Army after 25 years, jumped into software development and data aggregation in my last gig in the Army, and then moved that and found a great mission and people at Horizon 3 where I was the director of engineering for the last 3 years as we scaled up the commercial product. And now I'm focused on bringing that product to our federal user base, where a lot of us from the company grew up in our careers, and we've got a passion for national defense. And so it's a great crossroads for me and for the company as we move into this era of AI and how to protect networks against the adversary there.
Yep, thank you very much, Corey. And again, thanks for being here. But you did say the magic words, which is data aggregation. You can't, if you go to a Nucleus webinar and you say data aggregation, you know that somebody somewhere is going to be very excited. I know, maybe not to the level of an angel gets its wings, but probably one level just below that. You did good. Glad
I'm
we
working on
prepped.
my bingo card. It'll get filled out here.
Perfect. So to kind of frame up the conversation here, again, we like to make these very conversational, but I would like to start with a quick little kind of side story of an interaction that I had not too long ago. So at Black Hat this past year, I guess a few weeks ago, time is just a social construct, everybody. Don't worry about it. I was at a dinner that was a public-private partnership dinner. And one of the folks that was in attendance was a guy named Bob Joyce, who used to be the director of CISA, for those that don't remember. And he was giving a talk around basically how has AI shifted the cybersecurity landscape. So as the federal government, their core focus right now is thinking, they think in those longer time horizons. What does 10 years from now look like? 20 years from now look like? And one of the things that he mentioned was how very quickly the AI usage by attackers is actually shifting the landscape pretty aggressively to the point where we're seeing a ton of new kind of vibe coded tools. We used to have the concept of script kiddies, but now script kiddies can actually be a real problem. And so what do we do when that kind of dynamic starts to shift and defense becomes a lot more reactive than it was before? So one of the things that we're seeing that's really fascinating is actually just everything from, like 80% of ransomware attacks now use some sort of vibe coded or AI enhanced type of capability. So just to frame all of these things up, I mean, we're looking at a really dramatically changing cybersecurity landscape. What are you seeing over there at Horizon 3, Corey?
Yeah, thanks, Scott. I think spot on to what you're talking about with regard to AI's effect on the attacker's ability or capability. And so what we're seeing is the weaponization of exploits or TTPs faster than it probably happened in the past because the skill level of your, say, a normal attacker doesn't have to be as sophisticated to use exploits once they're developed and widely known around the community. So I think that's one impact. And what that does, like the impact on the defensive team, is you've got less time to defend your network against emerging threats. And so it's critical that you're, like we talked about already, aggregating good data, useful data, and then prioritizing that to take action swiftly, because at the speed of AI, you're going to be exploited before you know
Yeah, it really kind of changes that whole Nigerian prince scam from back in the day, right?
it.
Yeah, what's fascinating to me in particular is that you would think that generative AI being primarily a content generation type of tool, that a lot of the kind of attacks would actually increase phishing type of scenarios, right? And that's true. But the thing that's fascinating, and I think that is really has people worried, is less about the the phishing attacks themselves, even though that's definitely a concern. But it's really about how we're starting to see faster weaponization of vulnerability exploits and misconfiguration exploits compared to just your kind of run-of-the-mill phishing attacks, even though those we see on the rise as well. So the big takeaway from Bob and I think a few others here is that being defensive got a lot harder over the last 18 months, right? And not necessarily harder because the problem itself got bigger, but more likely because the problem velocity increased, right? And so, obviously anybody that's been around Nucleus for a while knows that we're really big on there's too much data, there's too much stuff everywhere. Every company that I know has 10 to 15 to 20 different security tools. I mean, if you look at some of the stats, it's like 70 to 80 security vendors. And so there's a ton of alerting that gets thrown your way. And even if you spread that across your entire business or organization, it still becomes kind of overwhelming and very difficult to do anything with. So obviously at Nucleus, we're very focused on sort of all those different use cases, like what's actually exploitable. We're looking at things like, well, is this even a valid vulnerability? Is it a false positive? Who owns it? All of those triage processes that come into play, right? And the challenge that we're running into is that, you look at for 10 years, we've been talking about how only 5% of vulnerabilities matter, right? And so, prioritization has sort of been the key through a lot of these things. But now I think we were talking about this backstage, right, Corey, is that it's less about just prioritizing. It's also about prioritizing and then escalating fixes as quickly as possible for those 5%. So the speed and velocity at which we have to respond is becoming, I think, the challenge of the day, if you will.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say like in my previous role in the Army in special operations, we talked about making data accessible, usable, and insightful to gain a mission advantage for the national security apparatus. I think it's very similar in cybersecurity in that it's great to aggregate a bunch of data or run scans or get information. But the bottom line where the rubber meets the road is what are you doing about your security posture? And is any of that data useful to actually protect yourself and your business and your future? So I definitely I love this slide because it kind of has that timeline effect of it of you're getting data in. Do you have context? Are your remediations effective? And are they effective in the time required by this AI powered adversary?
it's really a fascinating kind of battle space, right? Is because we're looking at attackers being already the proactive party, that they generally are the ones that are, starting the engagement with a defender. But the question then becomes, well, if defense is a reactive sport, how do we turn it into a proactive sport, right? And this is why I'm obviously very passionate about vulnerability and exposure management as a practice, because it's one of the few areas where you can be truly proactive to try to fix items before others can exploit. But it really brings a challenge to how do you actually do that. And the core thing that I always like to talk about is, in order to leverage AI effectively, it's all built on data and context, right? So I've heard scenarios where we're even talking about rebranding integrations as just context collection, right? And so ultimately, if everything leads towards an AI enhanced defense, if you'd like to call it that, in order to do that, you really need a great data foundation. So the very first thing, to leverage some type of AI tool, you really have to be able to understand what's going on in your environment. And it doesn't always have to be in your environment. There are actually levels to this. You can start easy and you can work your way up. But I really typically look at what are the 10 to 15 most critical security tools that are providing the most high fidelity alerts in your environment. Because again, not all data sources are created equal. How do you normalize it in a way that AI can actually understand? So even having discussions internally around threat models, right? Like, what does a tenable score mean to us versus a CVESS score from NVD versus EPSS, or any of those other types of prioritization mechanisms that you're looking at. But then, there's the iceberg of vulnerability prioritization is very, very deep. So we actually tend to focus on what is your business context more so than anything else. So it's how do you build a nice correlation between your assets, your vulnerabilities, and then your data itself. And then once you have that really nice, strong data foundation, now you have really the world's your oyster. You can build kind of expert systems on top of that. You can throw it at custom GPTs. There's all sorts of things you can do, but we want to really start with the data itself, because that's really how you get to your kind of eureka moment as far as AI goes. But Corey, like, what are you seeing as the most important types of data to have in your data foundation that really leads to better and faster remediation at scale?
Yeah, I think one of the unique things that we've found, really really helpful is we call it context scoring. So a CVSS score, gets assigned, and you talked about it, like depending on where it assigned from and who assigned it, it could have a varying, degree of impact based on your scoring system. Through pen testing, we feel like we've found a way to provide useful context scores for a variety of vulnerabilities and weaknesses, based on their impact. So when you think about the attacker's perspective, back to your how do we become proactive in defense? From our philosophy, we use offense to inform the defense. And so by attacking your own network repetitively and consistently and at scale with speed, and using TTPs that are absolutely being used in the wild currently, you're getting exceptional data that's extremely useful in prioritizing those remediation efforts, because that's where people are at a disadvantage compared to the attackers. Is you only have to have one exploitable weakness that gets exploited to be a failure, but you have to fix them all on the defensive side. So it's kind of the work is stacked against the defensive team for sure.
Yeah, I realized that this is probably a good time. For those that are not aware of what Horizon 3 is, maybe we give a quick summary of what Horizon 3 does. I just realized we
Yeah,
got
that'd be
we got
great.
right into it.
We're so excited about data. But yeah, so Horizon 3 is an autonomous penetration testing platform. We provide a lot of offensive security perspectives across fundamentally network architectures, but we're moving into web app pen testing and some other environments. We find misconfigurations, we find misused credentials, we find your CVEs, your KEVs, and chain those together exactly how an attacker would. We've hired experts from the national security apparatus. We've got special operations folks across the team. We've got experts from industry. We've got and we're a fully remote company, and so we pull the best talent from all over the country on the engineering side to create this product. And what we find is it really allows folks to prioritize what they find, how to fix it, and then the key aha moment is when people actually verify their fixes. So again, that overworked defensive team trying to secure the network. The hardest thing in cybersecurity is deciding what not to do. And so we feel through pen testing, the attacker's perspective, we're giving folks that clean data look with a really sharp eye on false positives because we don't want to hurt anything in your network. We don't want to shut you down, but we absolutely want to find things that are valuable and exploitable from the attacker's perspective so that you can fix those first in every situation.
Yeah, appreciate it. Again, probably should have done that earlier, but
That's
that's
all
on
right.
me. The real question is, could you shut people down? Because it sounds
Um,
like with great power comes great responsibility. I mean,
Exactly. We've got folks, our ethical hacking credentials are, on the line every day when we find 0 days and end days. Obviously, we use a responsible disclosure process to the vendors. But Node Zero is a very powerful tool, and we show where your data is at ransomware risk. So when some of those impacts that we find that an attacker would be going after are, domain compromised, they want to take over your entire domain and use that for their advantage. They want to capture your data, ransom it, things like that. And so Node Zero can absolutely show you exactly how an attacker can do that. So very powerful.
nah, absolutely. That's why we're big fans over here at Nucleus. So, anybody that knows me again knows that I'm really big on data quality, and there's a lot of alerting systems out there. There's tons of vulnerability scanners out there. There's tons of misconfiguration scanners. So I love high signal, low noise type of data feeds. And so obviously we're very excited on the partnership that we have with you guys. But one thing I do want to kind of pivot back into now is how can we actually really start to leverage AI? I know there's the kind of AI enabled pen testing piece that you'll talk about here in a minute, and how that kind of impacts your larger program. But I always want to start with really what's like the easiest, lowest barrier to entry item that you can use, especially if you're already in a vulnerability ecosystem and you have a vulnerability management process. Like, for example, if you're a Nucleus customer, right, you already have data in your console that's being fed in from all these places. So the question becomes, what can I use AI for without, again, there's even oftentimes this consternation or hesitancy to actually give your data to these AI models, right? And so I always like to say, well, are there ways we can leverage AI that don't involve giving folks or these tech companies all of our vulnerability and our asset and our business context data? And so a great way to start is actually what we would view as AI-enabled threat intelligence. So AI-enabled threat intelligence, I mean, we really view AI, specifically LLMs, as game-changing for this industry. I mean, the ways of doing manual threat intel analysis, like that, those days are behind us at this point, right? And I mean, this has some really big economic ramifications for that entire market. So it'll be really interesting to see where this goes over time. But the idea is that you have the ability to kind of collect data en masse across the entire internet. You have the ability to do dark web monitoring and all those kinds of things really, really easily. And like you can even do it oftentimes yourself as well. It's not that crazy to do anymore. But the important thing is that you can start to take all this information and you can build an AI model on top of this, and you can feed this into some sort of generic, call it like the model layer of the AI ecosystem, and you can get a lot of feedback, right? As simple as even just I mean, one of the things that I like to do is build custom GPTs just for fun to see what I can automate out of my life. And one of those items that we've been able to see is just prompting it as if it was a vulnerability analyst or a vulnerability researcher and say, what's your assessment of this vulnerability? And it will go, and you can use deep research and all these tools, and it will go and it'll tell you, and it's pretty good, right? So that ability to just dynamically look up whatever it is that you want without having to go hire a whole team of vulnerability researchers is really potentially game changing for an organization. So if you're ever unsure about where to start, it's as easy as saying, "Hey, ChatGPT, you are literally you're a vulnerability researcher. I need you to assess this vulnerability based on X, Y, and Z criteria," and you'll start getting pretty good results. So we view this as just like bare minimum, get your way into the door, and then once you have some experience leveraging these tools, then you can start to stitch it together with your business data, because obviously there are limitations to some of these systems as well. Tons and tons of limitations, it turns out. But really understanding where the limits are is the first step to being able to actually leverage AI in terms of your AI informed defense. I guess we should coin some term like that, right?
Yeah, for sure. I think some of the basics as well are like in those summarization and classification roles. I feel like that's the first thing folks do when they jump on ChatGPT the first time. They're like, "Hey, summarize this document or summarize these emails," or some pretty straightforward things that LLMs are exceptional for. I think those are great use cases for these large amounts of data that if you're doing a vulnerability scan or any types of data collection, you're overwhelmed. And so you have to use the right tool for the right job. And that includes LLMs and AI to aggregate or sorry, to summarize and classify what it is you're looking at or the things that you haven't found in those data points yet.
Yeah, absolutely. And before we move on here, I know I've got to do the shameless plug since it's a Nucleus webinar. Just for those that are Nucleus customers, just know that Nucleus, we have our own vulnerability intelligence feed now that we call Nucleus Insights. It's an AI-centric technology. You will see this. If you haven't seen it in your console already, you should see it by the end of the month as we roll it out to everyone. But just FYI, that's something that you now get as a Nucleus customer. So fun fact there. But with that, I do want to talk about one of the things that I think is probably the real reason folks are on this call, on this webinar, which is to talk about the cool offensive stuff. So, Corey, tell us about this beautiful visualization that we have on the right-hand side.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is actually this diagram has stood the test of time from really the inception of the company about 5 years ago when Snehal Antani and Tony Pilletier were working at the Joint Special Operations Command. Um, they were responsible for the network, and so Tony wanted to find out like, hey, what are the most the biggest threats to our network that we need to secure against. So we brought in a red team and did a big manual pen test of the networks there. And they came back with a list of things. Hey, these are the top 10 priorities that you need to fix ASAP. Cool. So from Tony's perspective, that was easy. Hey, we did a test. We've got really actionable priorities of work to help fix our network. Well, that was a very manual pen test. It was a red team, with exceptional authority to come in and do that exercise. And so Tony and the team fixed all those problems and went back to the pen testing team and said, "Hey, can you retest? Did our fixes work? Did we fix the things you told us to do?" And the red team basically laughed. "Hey, we'll see you next year. We'll see you in 18 months. There's not enough of us to go around inside the DoD enterprise to test all these networks all the time manually." So that was the impetus for Tony to spend nights and weekends trying to figure out how to automate pen testing. And so what we found is like through real world examples, manual pen testing just can't meet the scale and speed that's required to protect, the modern network. As networks change, as networks grows, this becomes a huge attack surface problem for every business and the government. And so manual pen testing is a huge bottleneck that prevents us from using that offensive perspective routinely and effectively to protect our networks. So if you go to the next slide, I think that kind of shows kind of the solution here is from the manual pen test diagram, you can see how one person or a team of pen testers can navigate some level of the network at some scope, usually scope down to time or people, depending on what your limitations are. You're going to find some interesting things in that pen test or in that red team exercise. However, if you can automate the program to attack all the available opportunities to do fingerprinting at scale, to do network scans at scale, and then to exploit every one of those possible opportunities to the max extent possible, you're able to pivot across all the vulnerable data sets and all the misconfigurations and reused passwords to have those attacker focused impacts and then raise those to a level of urgency so that the fixing team can fix them. And then again, in an automated fashion, you can retest at scale with speed to confirm that your fixes worked. So we feel that AI allows speed, it allows scale, it enables that full coverage of your network. And the way we've designed the program is we've kind of democratized pen testing back to the security team to run their own pen tests versus waiting on a exceptional human-based red team to come in and show them what's wrong with the network.
Yeah, I think we were even talking before this, right, Corey, about how the continuous monitoring requirement inside of NIST, how we would be surprised if anything was monitored even half continuously, much less continuously.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to be involved with FedRAMP 20X. Pete Waterman's doing a great job over there at FedRAMP, and in the things he's done in the last year, maybe year and a half. I can't remember how long he's been there, but they just released a ton of great documentation on continuous vulnerability management, and their intent for that program is super exciting in a philosophical change to the continuous monitoring problem.
We can all dream. We have our own FedRAMP authorization, and I can tell you, if I have to fill out another deviation request form, that's an Excel sheet. That is a link from another Excel sheet that has the list of POAMs, which is just a list of vulnerabilities from my vulnerability scanner. I might pop a gasket. So, um, yes, we love 20X over here. I just hope that it sticks. That would be
Yeah,
awesome.
me too. I think it's a great program.
Absolutely. And I mean, for those that haven't been in the Fed industry, the continuous monitoring framework has been in place for like 20 years at this point. And so some of this was back when it was all host-based scanning individually. And so there's been this interesting cycle where it went from these, actually, it might have been 25 years now. I forget, it's 2025 sometimes. I still in my head, it's still 2020. So yeah, maybe 25 years ago, you had this whole scan and fix cycle from like the host itself. So people would physically log into devices, do the scans they would install these bash scripts and things, do the scans, and then they would fix it on the spot versus like this larger, kind of longer process. So anyway, yeah, it's the same framework. It's just been updated to have some new terminology in it, but basically the same mindset. So it's obviously just challenging in the modern world. But yeah, I guess question for you actually, it's a product question for you, Corey. So it's from Eliza. It looks like. Which is the question is, how does Horizon 3 handle web application continuous pen testing? So is the capability limited to infra/cloud?
Yeah, so great question. So we started with the hardest problems first. So that was network infrastructure pen testing. And so we're currently working on web app pen testing using LLMs because that's a very applicable problem set for LLMs based on the wide divergence of web apps and the logic associated with them. LLMs are a great tool to use to point towards a web app and do that type of testing. Based on the road, I think in the roadmap, the PM team will probably kill me, but I think in early spring is when that's due for arrival in the Horizon 3 side.
Cool. Well, as the product representative for Nucleus, I'm going to support that message and deadlines and timelines entirely. Or I can yell at you. It's one of those options, but we don't need the people to see that.
That's right. That's right.
But cool. So yeah. So ultimately, when we're looking at how we actually can leverage AI, there's a whole, as you can see, there's like a whole gamut of and a range of things that we can do. And so one of the questions becomes like, I was actually talking. This is interesting. I was actually talking to an analyst not too long ago, where we were debating. If you can imagine, we were debating pretty aggressively on where AI belongs in a vulnerability management program, right? And so he had presented to me this big stack of like where he had these boxes of every single sub process within vulnerability and exposure management. And for anybody that knows, there's like 50 or 60 different sub processes you have to manage. And he had basically just taken a line and he had drawn like AI to every single box. And so the question was like, where is the cutoff for where AI can be useful? At what point is it sentient? All those sorts of fun topics that you get into with analysts when you're trying to get really high on those analyst reports. But the question was, where do we actually start with these AI technologies? And we look at an interesting part, which is how do we minimize the number of, oh my goodness, you have to look at these right now, right? So that's kind of problem set number one is how do we filter out all of the noise? And so on the one hand, you have risk-based prioritization, which you may or may not actually use with AI, right? So for example, at Nucleus, we don't believe that to get very high quality risk prioritization, you necessarily need AI technology, right? You can do a lot of this through just building an actual risk score or a risk algorithm and then like implementing the risk score and algorithm. We find that tends to be where the hardest part actually is the execution and implementation across 50 million data points versus just how should we prioritize? Like what's a critical to us? Like it's a simple threat modeling exercise. But where we look at some of the incredible value of where this could be is actually in the validation step. Now, Corey, you had said something that was really interesting earlier that I wanted to kind of circle back to use our great corporate parlance here. And when I think of validation, I think of the CTEM framework, right? That's a big push that's these days around how do we validate the exposures. But I always look at that as how do we validate that it's a false, like that it's a real vulnerability or a real exposure. But you actually, and at Horizon 3, I think you guys have a slightly different perspective where you actually take it a step further. It's not just about validating exposures themselves, right? It's actually even taking it a step further. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, for sure. So like I love this slide and it's one of our, kind of key concepts is the find, fix, verify cycle, kind of to your point of that validation. In the find portion of the cycle, that's node zero, pen testing your network, running active exploits and showing the proof, the path, and the impact of what an attacker will do in your network. So from our perspective, in our find phase, we're validating that this is a critical weakness or a chain of critical weaknesses that's leading to a business impact from our perspective, and our R&D effort, emphasizes no false positives in the program. That to us is both the validation that the weakness chain is real and that it has a true business impact that needs to be fixed. In the fix phase, we show you how to fix the various weaknesses that are in that attack path, whether it's a weakness or a CVE weakness or a misconfiguration. We're going to give you the detailed steps to solve that problem. And then in the validation phase, we coin the phrase of a one-click verify. There might be more than one click to the actual UI, all the PMs out there, but it's basically a retest of what you fixed so that you can validate back to your main point, Scott, is validate that your full workflow of actually having the security impact you set out to have has occurred through the attacker's perspective.
Yeah, you just keep picking on the product team today. I see how it is.
I
See how
was
it
the
is.
product team, so I know that plight.
Ah, perfect. No, so obviously we're not going to dive deep into every single one of these, but I think when we really break it down, there's really these three main goals that we're looking at as it comes to how, like, where to start when you're looking at where AI should fit into your process, right? So I love the idea of doing it as part of validation and being able to repeat processes over and over again. I love the idea that actually once you have all the data collected, you can actually pretty easily answer the question of who should fix what, because it's pretty straightforward to know like what the logic is behind what you're trying to accomplish. So for example, I know that every Windows server is owned by this team, right? That data exists in ServiceNow, it exists in Chasm tools, it exists in an Excel spreadsheet anywhere. But once you have all that data in place, you can build that into a system where you have to map and build logic directly inside of an automation system. Or these tools are very good at determining what is the essence of what you're trying to make happen. So as a new vulnerability comes in, can we actually just process it and then look at everything that's come before it and all the actions you've taken beforehand, and it actually just does it for you, right? So these are the types of scenarios that we're looking at as having the highest impact for the lowest amount of effort in your remediation process. So we're pretty stoked about a lot of those topics here, but I've been leaving this up so you guys can screenshot it and all that sort of fun stuff. But as a reminder, we do record these videos, and so you can go back and watch it later. So no need to take screenshots and send it to your CISO, which I know you want to do because this is great content. But I know one of the other topics that we really were diving into before this was how do you accelerate remediation with AI, not just the validation piece, not just the prioritization, but actually on the back half of that process. And it sounds like you guys are pretty passionate about that topic. So I'm going to let you speak your mind before I ask you more questions.
Yeah, super excited about this one. So if you didn't catch Snehal at Black Hat, so we were out there as well, fun time. Snehal gave a keynote on the big stage and kind of coined the phrase about fix ops. And so the concept there is, with the advent of AI, LLMs, and eventually the Model Context Protocol server, the MCP server, where folks are using these MCP servers to give their AI agents tools, context, and access, to data. The MCP server becomes like a superpower, I think, in the security world for the AI-enabled practitioner. So using an MCP server, we have one for Node Zero. Most of the popular tools have an MCP server out in some form or fashion. you can use your agentic tools to use the MCP server to do all these things in natural language on your behalf. So imagine I want to run a pen test. I tell my MCP server, run a pen test on network segment one. It runs, it does the thing, it comes back with the results. Hey, uh, give me the top three priorities I should fix right now based on that pen test and the last five pen tests in my file. Cool, it'll do that. And then as you integrate different MCP servers across your security stack, those that have remediation authority and capability, you could just tell it, hey, here's a list of stuff to fix it for me, tell me when it's done, and then you can go back into the workflow or have your agent working this workflow. So again, back to our kind of our upfront concept of how is AI changing the landscape of security? If attackers are enabled with AI and they're attacking at scale and with speed, how do we, as defenders, defend at scale and with speed? It's algorithm versus algorithm with humans by exception to do the checks and balances. So, and you can track all kinds of different metrics with this. The chart kind of shows there, ideally, you're finding a bunch of stuff in your network, criticals, highs, mediums, and over time you're working those things off to reduce those the impact of those weaknesses and improve your security posture over time.
Yeah, so putting aside the fact that you just said that robots will fight robots and that's the future of warfare, um, and you come from the army, so I actually take that on good authority. But aside from that, I do want to ask a follow-up question to your whole thesis here, right? Which is you mentioned that around agentic remediation. Now, this is a topic that we have debated and had conversations with many people on. And one of the things that's always been true that we've seen is that there is a change management process that exists for a very particular set of reasons. Obviously resiliency we find becomes the most important part of the CIA triad, right? Is how do we actually keep business operations running? And businesses oftentimes will pick that over all else, right? Imagine a full outage compared to a breach. I think most organizations generally would pick the breach over the full outage. And so, which makes that whole CrowdStrike scenario even more fascinating. But anyway, so aside from all that, the question I have is, you mentioned agents doing remediation. Do you see a path where, the hesitancy to let agents do patching on your behalf? And like, is that the future of remediation that you see? What are the types of limitations? What are the types of challenges we'll have to overcome in order for the market as a whole to actually feel like this is the right answer?
Yeah, for sure. Great question. So I think you talked about it in one of the discussions here. Context is king, right? So, only the business owner knows the context of their infrastructure and whether they want to remediate something, whether they want to patch to the next version, whether they want to take that server offline or, what have you, all the different options for remediation and mitigation. And so I think that's the hard part for AI right now is like, how do you trust the agent with enough authority to fix the things in the places where you want it to fix them versus where you want to reserve authority or decision-making space to not fix things or to mitigate things in a way that's more appropriate for that business situation at the time. So yeah, definitely a hard problem to solve, and I don't think it's solved. And there's probably no silver bullet there. There's going to be degrees of improvement. So maybe, all your lows and infos you task out to the agents. Anything else, that has a huge business impact, your crown jewels that you don't want auto remediation, you're going to have to control the machine lest it control you.
Yeah, if we could just make it so that I don't have to reboot my workstation every day, that would be awesome. That'd be a good start. Maybe we
For
focus
sure.
on focus on that. So it's a fascinating question though, right? Because I even, I'm this is our last couple sets of slides here. So I'm going to dig in a little bit. I'm a big process junkie over here, and one of the things that I think a lot about is what is the process to where we go from something has been found to we fixed it to we validated that the has happened. And so it sounds like with where we're at today, there's a set of decisions that need to get made, and I want to know, like, from your perspective, where should we point agents today, right? Because there's even options that we've seen. We've experimented at Nucleus with, we use Nucleus internally. We can integrate that into an IDE. And obviously we're MCP enabled as well. So it'd be a question like, okay, well, I could go into like an augment or a cursor or a windsurf and say, hey, what vulnerabilities do I have based on commits that I put into the code base? And can you fix them for me? And then remote agent goes off and does the thing. Where do you think is the best place for folks to start, Corey?
Wow, that's a big deep one, you know. So like if you're,
Absolutely.
fundamentally we want to build secure software from the start. So like I would start there probably, like I think there's a lot of concepts like as you're looking, especially in the federal space, as you're pushing containers into that space, stripping the non-essentials out of there to remove vulnerabilities from the container you're pushing out is kind of one method, or this from the software you're developing. So that might be the best case answer if we're looking for that. I think from the things we've talked about today and continue to talk about, knowing the context and knowing what to fix first is probably super valuable. And then the context, knowing yourself, kind of back to like the fundamentals of war, like know yourself, know your enemy. If you don't know your own network better than the attackers do, then you're at a very disadvantaged position to protect it. So that might be an area as well to like maybe not remediation, but at least let the agent show you what you have in your network. And if you're surprised by that report, then you've got some decisions to make there. And then across the board, as tooling and trust moves forward, more people are getting more comfortable with what the LLMs do, or they're getting more skilled in how to constrain the LLM to get the response that they're looking for, the outcomes that they're looking for. I think that'll go a long way in like trusted remediation or trusted agentic workflows with less humans in the loop.
That's what it's all about, right?
For
That's what it's all
sure.
about.
Automate, automate, automate.
For sure. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. That's our mission statement here at Nucleus is automate stuff away, right? So, I mean, obviously, we have to show that we're an AI centric company with the AI little, robot image here on the right hand side. I like him. I think he's cool. I wish I could make a little like a little robot that I could put on my desk. But the main thing I wanted to wrap up here with, because I know we're getting near the end of time, we have a couple open questions that we'll answer here in a second. But the main takeaways again are we see that AI is being used pretty heavily in the attacker space, right? And so our goal as defenders is always to be trying to shift the balance towards a more proactive approach, right? We don't want to wait for an attacker to actually attack us before we necessarily take some sort of action. And so when we start looking at the preventative activities we can take, how can we also leverage AI to sort of balance the dynamic out a little bit better? And again, it always starts with really good, solid data. It includes great context and great data collection and great data generation, right? So that's where we look at partners like Horizon 3 as a great opportunity. And obviously not all data feeds are created equal, right? An unauthenticated scan, an EDR based scan is going to be very different than attack chained up exploit chains strung together type of pen test. And so if you can do that automatically at a much lower cost and just make the supply demand curve work a little bit better for you, that makes a lot of sense. We've talked a lot about risk-based prioritization. People always talk about risk-based prioritization. For us, we do believe that RBVM is starting to shift and transition from just CVSS scores from, so when people say RBVM, they don't mean CVSS. They normally mean CVSS plus what you were supposed to always do with CVSS with all the temporal scores, environmental scores, and those kinds of things. But we actually view more data points being available to you to leverage and build real great business context, and then moving into validation. So is this an exposure? What's the actual triage process look like for this exposure? Have we validated that this fix has happened? All of those kinds of things, so that ultimately we can do exactly what we're always trying to do, which is how do we fix stuff faster? How do we make sure we're focusing on the right stuff, et cetera, et cetera. And with that, I do want to get to a couple questions as we are starting to wrap up here, which looks like is actually related to something I was just talking about, which is how has AI changed the balance of power between attackers and defenders over the past 18 months? So Corey, I don't know if you want to take that since I've been monologuing on this topic for the last couple of minutes.
Yeah, it's great. I think, there's various examples in the news, where I think, can't remember where they were from, but somebody used an LLM to identify a unknown 0 day and then use that to exploit um, across in the wild. And so AI driven exploits will be a thing. So like if humans right now are searching through code to find 0 days and end days, or 0 days that haven't been discovered and patched, AI is probably going to have a role in making that faster and at scale, to create more vulnerabilities, if you will, to exploit and then to use those to their advantage. I think on the defender side, we've talked a lot about that, and that's kind of the purpose of the webinar here, is like, how do we use AI as defenders to be proactive and learn everything we can from the data we're collecting.
Yeah, it's actually brings up those interesting questions, right? Like I think a lot about how's the market changing. And one of those things that I'm seeing is there's a proliferation now of AI-based scanning tools where actually instead of doing your traditional scanning where it'll, go through and scan and then, look up vulnerability database information, it actually will just throw an LLM at a code base and see what happens, right? So it'll be really interesting to see what the results of that are. I think the jury is still out on whether or not the results are actually any better than a like traditional SaaS scan, especially with all the changes that have happened and the investment that has gone into that. But that'll be interesting to keep your eye on, everybody, as we're going through this. How can we discover better, more valid data, even down to the scanner level, right? That market's changing pretty rapidly.
For sure. Another
Yeah.
thing that's come up recently that I've been studying is the effect of the energy grid on all the LLM, all the AI powered tooling that's coming out. Like the a next major threat vector probably is, does our nation have the power to run the AI capabilities that we want across the board, commercial, federal, state, local, all those aspects are going to come into play. And that becomes a pretty assailable assault vector for adversaries. So those are interesting problems as well.
They are. All I know is that everybody keeps saying please and thank you to ChatGPT. We gotta burn that investor money. Just a couple cents a query. It makes a difference. Although I don't know if I'm supposed to. I should probably say save energy and save power. But I'm from Florida, so we obviously have a love-hate relationship with those kinds of things over there. But all that being said, we are at the end of our time here today. If you have any questions, obviously feel free to reach out to us. We'll publish this link later too if you want to send it to any of your friends. Hopefully you got something out of this. Again, always focused on thought leadership type information. We're not just out here trying to peddle our wares. So hopefully you got something out of this. But if you have any thoughts, concerns, questions, obviously feel free to reach out to our marketing team, not to me. I don't care about the feedback. But in reality, you can find us all on LinkedIn. You can obviously find Nucleus Security, Horizon 3 as well. I'm sure we're always open. So if you think of anything that you'd like to talk about, we're always happy to chat with you. But in the meantime, thank you again, everybody, for joining us today in the after lunch shift, and hopefully we'll see you again soon.
Thanks, Scott.
Thanks, everybody.